Hello, my friends. Welcome back to our channel. How are you today? I hope you are doing great. But before you answer that, let me ask you something else. How many decisions have you made this month that you later regretted, simply because you made them while feeling angry, hurt, or overwhelmed? Take a moment. Think about it honestly. Most of us have a long list, messages we shouldn't have sent, promises we shouldn't have made, silence we shouldn't have kept, all because in that moment, our emotions were driving and our wisdom was sitting quietly in the back seat. Today, we're going to talk about something direct, something a little uncomfortable, but something that can genuinely change your life if you let it sink in. It's time to stop being an emotional fool. Before we begin, do one small thing for me. Press the like button. It takes only 1 second for you, but it means the whole world to us. Okay, are you ready? Let's begin with Lesson 1. Lesson 1. Your emotions are not your enemy, but they are not your boss either. There's an important difference between feeling your emotions and being controlled by them, and most people never learn to separate these two things clearly. Emotions themselves are not the problem. Anger, sadness, excitement, fear, all of these are natural, human, and completely valid. The problem begins when we allow these temporary feelings to make permanent decisions on our behalf. Think about how often this happens in daily life. Someone says something hurtful, and in a wave of anger, you send a message you can't take back. Someone disappoints you, and in a moment of hurt, you make a promise to yourself. I'll never trust anyone again. You feel excited about an opportunity, and without thinking clearly, you commit to something you haven't fully considered. In each of these moments, the emotion isn't wrong for existing. The mistake is letting that temporary emotion make a decision meant to last far longer than the feeling itself. This is what it means to act like an emotional fool, not because your feelings are foolish, but because you've allowed a passing wave of emotion to steer decisions that deserve clearer thinking. Anger fades, sadness eases, excitement settles. But the message you sent, the promise you made, the commitment you rushed into, often remains long after the emotion that created it has completely disappeared. The goal is not to suppress your emotions or pretend you don't feel them. Suppressing emotions creates its own set of problems, and it isn't healthy either. The goal is to create a small but powerful gap between feeling an emotion and acting on it immediately. This gap, even just a few minutes, sometimes even a few hours, is where clear thinking has room to return before a temporary feeling gets to make a permanent decision. Consider how differently a situation unfolds when this gap exists. Someone insults you. In the heat of the moment, you feel a surge of anger. Without the gap, you respond immediately, harshly, saying things you don't fully mean, escalating a situation that could have stayed small. With the gap, you feel the same anger, but you pause, you breathe, you allow a few minutes to pass before responding. Often, once that gap exists, you respond in a way that reflects your values, not just your temporary emotional state. This single skill, creating space between feeling and reacting, is one of the most powerful tools for taking back control of your decisions, your relationships, and your life. Here are 3 simple truths about the relationship between emotion and decision-making. First, feeling an emotion fully is healthy. Acting immediately and impulsively on that emotion, without any pause, is often where real trouble begins. Second, emotions are temporary, but the consequences of impulsive decisions made during them often last far longer than the feeling itself. Third, creating even a small gap between emotion and action gives clear thinking room to return before a permanent decision gets made. Remember this, my friend. Your emotions deserve to be felt, honestly and fully. But they were never meant to be the ones driving every decision in your life. That role belongs to a clearer, calmer version of you, the one who shows up once the gap has been given room to work. Let's do a quick recap. Emotions themselves aren't the problem. Impulsive action taken during them often is. Creating a small pause between feeling and reacting allows clearer thinking to guide your decisions instead of temporary emotion alone. Here is your challenge for today. The next time you feel a strong emotion rising, especially anger or hurt, pause before reacting. Give yourself even a few minutes of space before responding. You are allowed to feel deeply, my friend. Just don't let a temporary feeling write a permanent chapter of your story. Lesson 2. Stop explaining your pain to people who didn't earn the right to hear it. There is a specific kind of emotional foolishness that quietly drains people every single day, and it rarely gets talked about honestly. It's the habit of pouring your deepest feelings, your struggles, your pain, into the hands of people who never actually earned the right to receive them. Not because those people are necessarily bad, but because not everyone around you deserves access to the most sensitive parts of your inner world. Think about how often this happens without us even realizing it. Someone criticizes you unfairly, and instead of simply letting their opinion pass, you spend hours explaining yourself, defending yourself, trying desperately to make them understand your side, even though their opinion of you was never going to change your actual worth. Someone treats you carelessly, and you exhaust yourself trying to explain your hurt to them, hoping they'll finally understand how much they affected you, when their pattern has already shown you they either can't or won't. This is one of the clearest signs of emotional foolishness. Giving your energy, your explanations, and your vulnerability to people who have already shown you through their actions that they won't handle it with care. It's not weakness to want to be understood. That desire is deeply human. But wisdom means learning to recognize who has actually earned the right to understand you, and who simply hasn't, no matter how badly you wish they would. Consider two different responses to the exact same situation. Someone facing unfair criticism from a person who barely knows them. One person spends the whole day replaying the criticism, crafting explanations in their mind, desperately wanting this near stranger to see them differently. Their entire emotional energy becomes hijacked by someone who ultimately holds very little real importance in their life. The other person acknowledges the sting of the criticism, feels it honestly for a moment, and then consciously chooses not to spend further energy explaining themselves to someone who hasn't earned that level of emotional investment. Same criticism, completely different use of emotional energy. This doesn't mean becoming cold, distant, or refusing to communicate honestly with people who matter. Close relationships, the ones built on mutual respect and genuine care, absolutely deserve your honest explanations, your vulnerability, and your effort to be understood. The foolishness isn't in caring deeply. It's in caring deeply about the opinions of people who have shown repeatedly that they don't deserve that level of access to your emotional world. Protecting your emotional energy this way isn't arrogance. It's simply recognizing that your explanations, your vulnerability, and your peace of mind are valuable, and they shouldn't be handed out freely to everyone who demands them, especially people who have already proven they won't treat them with care. Here are 3 simple truths about protecting your emotional energy wisely. First, not everyone who criticizes or hurts you has earned the right to your explanation. Some opinions simply deserve to be let go without further defense. Second, exhausting yourself trying to be understood by someone who has already shown they won't listen is emotional energy spent without real return. Third, reserve your deepest honesty and vulnerability for people who have shown, through consistent action, that they can be trusted with it. Remember this, my friend. You don't owe every person a full explanation of your feelings, your choices, or your pain. Some people simply haven't earned that access, no matter how loudly they demand it. Let's do a quick recap. Emotional foolishness often looks like over-explaining yourself to people who haven't earned the right to your vulnerability. Wisdom means protecting your emotional energy for relationships built on genuine care and mutual respect. Here is your challenge for today. Think of one situation where you've been over-explaining yourself to someone who hasn't earned that access, and today, choose to let it go instead. Your peace is valuable, my friend. Stop spending it on people who were never going to protect it in return. Lesson 3. Reacting to everything is a sign you're being controlled, not strong. There is a quiet trap many people fall into, believing that reacting strongly to everything, every insult, every disrespect, every small provocation, is a sign of strength. But the truth is often the exact opposite. Reacting to everything isn't strength. It's a sign that anyone, anywhere, can pull your strings simply by saying or doing the right thing to trigger you. Think about how this actually works. Someone says something rude, and you immediately feel compelled to respond, to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to make sure they know they can't speak to you that way. In that moment, it feels like you're standing up for yourself, but look closer and something else becomes visible. That person, with just a few words, was able to completely redirect your mood, your focus, and your energy simply by choosing to provoke you. They didn't force you to react. They simply offered the bait, and you took it every single time. This is one of the clearest signs of emotional foolishness, allowing every external trigger to successfully pull a reaction out of you, as if you have no say in the matter at all. True strength isn't reacting to everything that tries to provoke you. True strength is having the self-control to choose which things actually deserve your reaction, and letting the rest simply pass by, unaffected. Consider 2 people facing the exact same rude comment from a stranger online. One person feels the sting immediately, and within seconds is typing an angry response, determined to defend themselves, to win the argument, to prove the stranger wrong. Their entire mood shifts. Their focus is hijacked, all because of a comment from someone they'll likely never actually meet. The other person feels the same initial sting, but pauses and asks themselves honestly, does this actually deserve my energy right now? More often than not, they decide it doesn't, and they simply continue with their day, unaffected, while the first person is still emotionally tangled in an argument that changed nothing. This doesn't mean you should never respond to disrespect, or that standing up for yourself is wrong. Sometimes, A response truly is necessary and important. But there's a clear difference between a calculated, intentional response, chosen because the situation actually matters, and an automatic reaction, triggered simply because someone knew exactly which button to press. Learning to pause before reacting to every provocation isn't weakness or passivity. It's actually one of the most powerful forms of self-control available to you, because it means your emotional state is no longer something other people can easily manipulate simply by pushing the right buttons. Here are 3 simple truths about choosing your reactions wisely. First, reacting to everything isn't strength. It often reveals how easily others can control your emotional state with minimal effort. Second, not every provocation deserves a response. Some situations are simply not worth the emotional energy required to engage with them. Third, a calculated, intentional response is very different from an automatic reaction. One reflects control. The other reflects being controlled. Remember this, my friend. The people who provoke you the most are often testing exactly how easily they can pull a reaction from you. The moment you stop giving that reaction automatically, you quietly take your power back. Let's do a quick recap. Reacting to every provocation isn't a sign of strength. It's often a sign of being easily controlled by others. Real strength lies in pausing and choosing intentionally which situations genuinely deserve your reaction. Here is your challenge for today. The next time something small tries to provoke a reaction from you, pause and ask yourself honestly, does this actually deserve my energy? Choose your response with intention, not automatically. You don't have to react to everything, my friend. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply choosing not to give your energy away. Lesson 4. Stop letting your mood decide your standards. There is a quiet, dangerous habit many people fall into without ever fully noticing it, allowing their current mood to decide what they'll accept, what they'll tolerate, and what they'll excuse. When you feel happy, generous, and hopeful, you say yes to things you'd normally question. When you feel lonely or emotional, you accept treatment you'd normally reject. Your standards start shifting, not based on what's actually right for you, but based on whatever mood happens to be controlling you in that particular moment. Think about how often this plays out quietly in relationships. When someone feels confident and emotionally stable, they clearly recognize disrespect and they don't tolerate it. But that same person, on a lonely or vulnerable day, might accept that exact same disrespect, simply because their emotional state that day made them more willing to excuse it, more desperate for connection, more afraid of being alone. The disrespect didn't change. Their mood did, and their standards quietly moved along with it. This is one of the clearest forms of emotional foolishness, allowing temporary emotional states to redefine what you're willing to accept from others or from life. A boundary that only exists when you're feeling strong isn't really a boundary at all. A standard that disappears the moment you feel lonely, insecure, or emotional isn't really a standard. It's simply a preference that depends entirely on your mood. Real standards, the kind that actually protect you, are not supposed to change based on how you feel in any given moment. If disrespect is unacceptable, it should be unacceptable whether you're feeling confident or feeling low. If a certain kind of treatment isn't good for you, that truth doesn't change simply because you're feeling emotional, needy, or afraid of being alone that day. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or emotionless. It means learning to recognize when your current mood is trying to quietly lower your standards and choosing deliberately to hold the line anyway, even when a vulnerable emotional state is whispering that maybe, just this once, it's okay to accept less than you deserve. Here are 3 simple truths about protecting your standards from your changing moods. First, your standards shouldn't depend on how you feel in the moment. What was true yesterday, when you felt strong, remains true today, even when you feel vulnerable. Second, loneliness and emotional vulnerability often quietly lower our standards, making us more willing to accept things we'd normally reject. Third, a boundary only held when convenient isn't really a boundary. Real standards remain consistent, regardless of your current emotional state. Remember this, my friend. The moments you feel most emotional are often exactly when your standards need the most protection, not the moments to quietly let them slip. Let's do a quick recap. Allowing your mood to decide your standards leads to inconsistent boundaries that shift with your emotions, rather than protecting you consistently. Real standards remain steady, regardless of whether you're feeling confident or vulnerable in any given moment. Here is your challenge for today. Notice one standard you sometimes lower when you're feeling emotional or lonely. And today, commit to holding that same standard, regardless of your mood. Your worth doesn't change based on your mood, my friend. Neither should what you're willing to accept. Lesson 5. Overthinking is emotion disguised as thinking. There is a quiet trap that many people fall into, believing they are being careful, responsible, and thoughtful, when in reality, they are simply drowning in emotion disguised as logic. This trap is called overthinking, and it convinces you that replaying the same worry, the same conversation, the same decision, again and again, is somehow productive, when in truth, it's often just anxiety wearing the costume of careful analysis. Think about how overthinking actually feels from the inside. You replay a conversation you had earlier, analyzing every word, wondering if you said the wrong thing, imagining every possible way it could have gone differently. You lie awake at night, running through worst-case scenarios about a decision you haven't even made yet, convincing yourself that if you just think about it enough, you'll finally arrive at certainty. It feels, in the moment, like careful thinking. It feels responsible, even wise. But look closely, and you'll notice something important. Very little of this repeated thinking is actually producing new information, new clarity, or new solutions. It's simply the same worry, dressed differently, circling endlessly, without ever truly landing anywhere useful. This is one of the sneakiest forms of emotional foolishness, because it doesn't look like emotion at all. It looks like thinking, like responsibility, like being careful and thorough. But real thinking moves somewhere. It gathers information, considers options, and eventually reaches a decision or a resting point. Overthinking, on the other hand, doesn't move anywhere. It simply loops the same fears, the same doubts, the same imagined scenarios, repeating themselves in slightly different words, convincing you that one more round of analysis will finally bring peace. When in reality, peace was never going to come from more thinking in the first place, because the problem was never a lack of information. It was unprocessed emotion, wearing thinking's clothing. Consider 2 people facing the same uncertain situation, waiting to hear back about an important decision that affects their future. One person spends every waking hour replaying every possible outcome, imagining rejection, imagining failure, imagining every conversation that might follow bad news, exhausting themselves completely before any actual answer has even arrived. By the time real information finally comes, whatever the outcome, they're already emotionally drained from days of imagined suffering that may not have even matched reality. The other person acknowledges the uncertainty honestly, feels the discomfort of not knowing, and then consciously chooses to redirect their attention toward what they can actually control today, rather than endlessly rehearsing outcomes that haven't happened yet. When the actual answer arrives, they're able to respond to real information with real energy, instead of arriving already exhausted from a battle that existed only in their mind. This distinction matters deeply because overthinking often masquerades as diligence, as though replaying a problem enough times will eventually produce a breakthrough. But most overthinking isn't actually solving anything. It's simply anxiety searching for control in situations where certainty isn't available, using thought as a way to feel like something productive is happening, when really, the mind is just circling the same emotional territory again and again, without ever landing anywhere new. Learning to recognize the difference between genuine problem-solving and emotional looping is one of the most valuable skills you can build. Genuine thinking has a direction. It moves toward a decision, a next step, a resolution. Overthinking has no direction. It simply repeats, growing louder and more exhausting the longer it continues, without ever actually resolving the very uncertainty it claims to be working through. Here are 3 simple truths about recognizing overthinking for what it truly is. First, real thinking moves toward decisions and next steps. Overthinking simply loops the same worry again and again, without ever truly resolving anything. Second, overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility or carefulness, but repeating the same fear in slightly different words is not the same as productive thought. Third, certainty rarely comes from more thinking when the real issue is unprocessed emotion. Sometimes, the wisest choice is acknowledging the discomfort honestly, rather than trying to think your way out of a feeling. Remember this, my friend. Not every repeated thought is wisdom. Sometimes it's simply emotion, circling relentlessly, convincing you that one more round of worry will finally bring the peace that only acceptance, action, or time can actually offer. Let's do a quick recap. Overthinking often disguises itself as careful, responsible thinking, when in reality, it's frequently unprocessed emotion looping without direction or resolution. Learning to notice when your thoughts have stopped moving toward decisions and started simply repeating fear is an important step toward genuine emotional control. Here is your challenge for today. Notice one thought you've been replaying repeatedly without any new resolution, and instead of thinking through it once more, gently redirect your attention toward one small action you can actually take today. You don't need to think your way out of every feeling, my friend. Sometimes, the wisest step is simply noticing the loop and choosing to step out of it. Lesson 6. Maturity is feeling everything and still choosing wisely. We have spent 5 lessons uncovering the many disguises of emotional foolishness. We learned that impulsive reactions often create permanent consequences from temporary feelings. We learned that over-explaining ourselves to people who haven't earned that access quietly drains our energy for nothing. We learned that reacting to every provocation reveals how easily others can control us, rather than proving our strength. We learned that allowing our mood to decide our standards leaves us inconsistent and vulnerable, accepting today what we'd reject tomorrow. And we learned that overthinking is often simply emotion, disguised cleverly as careful, responsible thought. Today, in our final lesson, I want to bring all of this together and answer a question that quietly sits underneath everything we've discussed. If we're not supposed to suppress our emotions, and we're not supposed to be ruled by them either, then what exactly are we supposed to do with them? The answer is maturity, and maturity is often deeply misunderstood. Many people believe maturity means feeling less, becoming cold, distant, unaffected by life's ups and downs. But this isn't maturity at all. It's simply suppression wearing a calmer mask. True emotional maturity isn't about feeling less. It's about feeling everything fully, honestly, without shame. And still, in the middle of that feeling, choosing your actions wisely, rather than letting the emotion make the choice for you. Think about what this actually looks like in practice. A mature person facing betrayal doesn't pretend they're unaffected. They feel the hurt, the anger, the disappointment, fully and honestly, without minimizing it or pretending it doesn't matter. But that same person doesn't allow that hurt to write a reckless message, doesn't allow that anger to make a permanent decision about their future, doesn't allow that disappointment to become the voice that decides what happens next. They feel deeply, and they still choose carefully. This is the entire difference between emotional foolishness and emotional maturity. Not the presence or absence of feeling, but what happens after the feeling arrives. Consider two people experiencing the exact same painful rejection. Someone they trusted let them down significantly. One person, an emotional fool in the moment of hurt, immediately reacts, sending angry messages, making dramatic declarations about never trusting anyone again, burning bridges that took years to build, all within the heat of a single emotional wave. Days later, once the emotion has settled, they often regret much of what was said and done, wishing they'd given themselves more time before acting. The other person, equally hurt, equally betrayed, feels the exact same pain, cries if they need to, sits with the disappointment honestly, but doesn't act immediately from within that emotional storm. They allow the wave to move through them first, and only once some clarity returns do they decide, thoughtfully, what response, if any, the situation truly deserves. Same pain, completely different outcome, simply because one person let emotion make the decision, while the other let emotion be felt, and then let clarity make the decision instead. This is what every lesson in this series has ultimately been building toward. Creating a pause between feeling and reacting isn't about denying your emotions. It's about giving wisdom room to speak after emotion has already had its say. Protecting your energy from people who haven't earned your vulnerability isn't coldness. It's simply recognizing where your openness is genuinely safe. Refusing to react to every provocation isn't passivity. It's the quiet strength of choosing your battles intentionally. Holding your standards steady regardless of your mood isn't rigidity. It's simply protecting your worth consistently, rather than negotiating it based on how vulnerable you happen to feel today. And recognizing overthinking as unprocessed emotion rather than useful thought isn't dismissing your worries. It's simply learning to stop mistaking anxious repetition for genuine problem solving. All of these lessons point toward the same underlying truth. Emotional maturity was never about eliminating emotion from your life. That would be neither possible nor healthy. It's about developing a relationship with your emotions where you remain fully human, fully feeling, and still, underneath all of that feeling, capable of choosing actions that align with your deeper values rather than your momentary state. This is genuinely difficult work, and it doesn't happen overnight or through simply reading or hearing about it once. It's built slowly, moment by moment, through countless small choices, pausing instead of reacting immediately, protecting your energy instead of over-explaining to those who haven't earned it, holding your standards instead of letting loneliness quietly lower them, noticing overthinking instead of mistaking it for wisdom. Each of these small choices, repeated consistently over time, slowly transforms someone from being ruled by their emotions into someone who feels deeply and still remains steady, wise, and in control of their own decisions. Let's talk about 3 final truths to carry with you from this series. First, maturity is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of clear choice, even in the middle of strong feeling. Feeling deeply and choosing wisely are not contradictions. They can and should exist together. Second, every lesson in this series ultimately points toward the same skill, creating space between what you feel and what you do, so that wisdom, not just emotion, gets a genuine voice in your decisions. Third, this transformation happens gradually, through small, repeated choices, not through a single dramatic decision. Each time you pause instead of reacting immediately, you strengthen this skill a little more. Remember this, my friend. The goal was never to stop feeling. The goal was to stop letting temporary feelings write decisions meant to last far longer than the emotion itself. You are allowed to feel everything, fully and honestly. You are also capable of choosing wisely, even in the middle of that feeling. Both are true, and both, together, are exactly what real emotional strength looks like. Let's do a quick recap of everything we've learned in this series. Impulsive reactions during strong emotion often create consequences that outlast the feeling itself. So creating a pause before acting protects your future from your temporary state. Not everyone has earned the right to your deepest explanations and vulnerability, and protecting that energy is wisdom, not coldness. Reacting to every provocation reveals how easily others can control your emotional state, while intentional response reflects real strength. Your standards should remain steady regardless of your mood, not shift based on how vulnerable or lonely you're feeling in any given moment. And overthinking is often simply unprocessed emotion, disguised as careful thought, looping without ever truly resolving anything. Here is your final challenge, my friend. The next time a strong emotion rises within you, whether it's anger, hurt, loneliness, or fear, allow yourself to feel it completely and honestly. And then, before acting, ask yourself one simple, powerful question. Is this decision coming from my emotion right now, or from my deeper values? Let that answer guide what happens next. You were never meant to suppress what you feel, my friend. You were simply meant to stop letting temporary emotion make permanent decisions on your behalf. Feel fully. Choose wisely. That is the difference between being ruled by your emotions and finally, truly, becoming the one in control. And that brings us to the end of today's journey, my friend. We learn that feeling deeply and choosing wisely are not opposites. Real strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the presence of clear choice, even in the middle of it. If these words gave you something worth carrying forward today, please share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're allowed to feel without letting that feeling control them. And if you believe wisdom deserves a voice alongside your emotions, this channel is a must-follow for you. We don't just teach English here. We teach life-changing lessons that can transform the way you think, speak, and live. So please, subscribe today. Not just for us, but for the calmer, wiser version of you that's quietly growing. Thank you for spending this time with me. Feel fully, choose wisely, my friend. Take care, and see you soon.